Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of a messy catch-up. I think it makes sense to start with books, and even though I have actually started quite a few different books, the only book that I finished since my last video was The Lost Flock by Jane Cooper. It's kind of a behind-the-scenes look at what someone who has no idea what they're doing in terms of like sheep rearing gets into when she decides to like venture down that path. Some of it was interesting, but it also just felt like it was too much maybe mundane detail into the day-to-day. This book did not catch my attention like I had hoped it would. After reading A Short History of the World According to Sheep, I think I was feeling very primed to find out more about sheep and culture around them and history and little factoids and things around sheep. And so I picked this one up thinking that it would be a bit more of that sort of thing, and I think for me it just ended up being a little bit too much of a mundane deep dive into the ins and outs of just running a sheep farm, and also Jane Cooper's personal story on that, which was fine, but it didn't really grip me the way that I had hoped it would. And although that one didn't work for me, I am still really interested in knitting, because that was, you know, the initial catalyst for me going in this direction with some of my books and stuff like that. So there are a lot of other books on my to-read list that I will be picking up over time that have to do with either sheep or knitting specifically or adjacent topics. But the next book that I started reading a bit more focusedly, I suppose, was Useful Work versus Useless Toil by William Morris. I picked this book up a while ago, I think about 2 years ago, and did start it around then, but I just recently restarted and finished the title essay, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant and frighteningly relevant to the times that we currently live in. When we think about technological advancement and what's happening now with things like AI, but not just that, I think we tend to think of it in modern terms only, or as a fresh contemporary issue when it's been an issue in the past as well. And that's not to say that, oh, we've seen this before, it's not a big deal. I actually think it's a huge deal. I think it's quite frightening, some of what we're playing with, and I think it is a little upsetting that these things have been identified ages ago and nothing's been done to safeguard against them. But another part of this essay that I really liked was how much it made me refocus on the idea of craftsmanship and investing in certain types of skills that I feel like we have lost completely or are in the process of losing as individuals, but also societally. So I guess my theme for this year has been intentionality, and this book has helped me hone in a little bit more about what that means to me. And it's a book that I would definitely recommend if you're interested at all in craftsmanship, in artistry and creativity, in how those things are affected by automation more broadly. And if you have any interest in the idea of work itself, what its use is, what constitutes good work versus bad work, what constitutes, well, useless toil. And this book pairs quite well with a book I read last year called Lost in Work: Escaping Capitalism by Amelia Horgan, which is a more contemporary take on work and looking at how work is shaped in a capitalist society. A lot of the things that William Morris touches on from his essays, which are from the late 1800s, are still really relevant today, which, yeah, for me is a little bit concerning. One of the big reasons that I just kind of fell off with the videos and stuff like that is that two of our friends from New York were visiting us, and we showed them a little bit around Yorkshire, but the main point of the trip was for us to do a road trip around Scotland, and that was my first time in Scotland, so it was a really interesting experience for me. And I think what was also interesting is how many people, whether they be British people or Americans or whoever, have this thing about like Scotland's really hyped up as this like magical place and all of that stuff. But I feel like I go into things pretty level-headed and tried to be fairly neutral going in, and didn't want to like be disappointed when I get there and all that kind of thing. So our road trip took us through the Lake District, up across to Edinburgh, up to Inverness, over to Isle of Skye, back down to Glasgow, down through to West Yorkshire. It's probably worth mentioning as well that one of our American friends has links back in time to Scotland, and his last name is Scottish, and so, you know, there's that family history there. And similarly, my partner also has a Scottish last name and history in Scotland, not that far back, like a few generations ago. But I think the thing that was a bit weird for me to think about, that I was confronted with a few times there, is the fact that 3 of the family names that eventually came together to create me are Scottish. And obviously the reason that that is very interesting to me, a black person, is that the colonial threads there are very strong, and so what it means to be attached to Scotland for me will be very different from my white partner or friends. I think my link to Scotland will be the history of that will be necessarily more violent and or exploitative than theirs. All of that to say, that is the context of us going in to Scotland. And also, before I say anything else, I just want to say we had a great time. It was a lovely trip. That said, I was very surprised by my time in Scotland. So for one, I felt like it was just bizarrely touristy in a way that it felt like Scotland was almost making a caricature of itself. And I understand why that is, but I feel like there are fewer places, it seems like, in England that are touristy in that way, outside of maybe London. And so that was a real weird one to kind of get to grips with, but it was also interesting seeing the different places that we went to and my initial impression of each of them. I was told, before going to Edinburgh, I was told that it was this like really fairy tale like amazing place that, you know, just has a magic to it and all of that stuff. And I tried not to let that influence my opinion of it going in, but when we got there, I just did not feel like that was the vibe at all. It was described previously to me as being like a big version of York, and York is very cute and quaint and very old school feeling and all of that kind of, I don't know, sort of typical ye olde British town kind of feeling. I did not feel like that at all with Edinburgh. Edinburgh felt more like a massive version of Harrogate to me. Harrogate feels like a bit of a swanky, posh, condescending place, although it is also very cute. And Edinburgh felt a bit like that, but with these really massive, tall, imposing buildings that felt almost, I don't know, like they're encroaching on your personal space. It didn't feel that welcoming to me. It felt like the architecture itself felt a bit judgy to me. And then outside of that, I think when you start approaching the more touristy places, they are hyper touristy. Places like the castle or the Royal Mile or wherever else. It just feels heavily, heavily touristy. And so I think that definitely affected some of how I felt about it. And outside of that, the expense was pretty shocking. It felt like it wanted to be London and charging London prices, but I don't know, it was a little off-putting, to be honest, but I could definitely see how you could have a good time there. But I think it would have probably helped for me to be a bit more prepared for how touristy it was and how expensive it could be as well. Even just like staying somewhere was a lot more expensive than I think a lot of other places in the country, so that was a bit shocking. I think levels of inequality feel huge. After that, we went up to Inverness, which was a breath of fresh air for me. It was much less touristy than Edinburgh, understandably, but it was still pretty touristy. It felt like every nook and cranny of Scotland wanted to sell you a tartan or a Highland cow like plushie or something like that, which I think especially for the tartans, after reading A Short History of the World According to Sheep and learning that the whole family tartan thing is a relatively modern tourist fantasy, felt like for that to be so present everywhere, I don't know, it felt weird, I guess, is what I'm saying. And then the highlight of the whole trip, I think for everyone, was Isle of Skye, which it definitely was a lovely place. And there were some frustrations with how over touristy it was in certain areas and food availability after a certain time of day. or battered up roads and things like that. Certain things made it feel like it was an island that was suddenly swamped with tourism a little before it was ready for it, I guess. But that certainly didn't take away from the impressive landscape. And I think if we were to go again, we would be better prepared for how to make the most of every aspect of the trip, and particularly this leg of it, knowing certain things about like when places close or where the best place is to get lunch at certain times or whatever else, so you're not like essentially chasing food throughout the day based on timings of when things shut and stuff like that. I'm gonna just say now, my big regret from the whole trip was not forcing the group to go to a wool shop at least once. It just feels like a thing that you have to do when, or if you're someone who's just recently got into knitting or has been into knitting for a while, it just feels like an obvious thing that you should do, and I didn't get to do that. So I don't know, I guess I have to go back to Scotland at some point, pick up some wool. After I left Skye, we made our way to Glasgow, and that was another interesting sort of place to be. It felt for me a little bit more comfortable than Edinburgh in terms of it being a real lived-in feeling city that didn't feel as hyper touristy as Edinburgh did and didn't feel as overpriced as Edinburgh. Though my goodness, it is hard to find cheap parking anywhere in Glasgow. And I was able to meet up with someone there who knows the place quite well, and you know, we were walking around and stuff and just chatting and catching up and stuff. So that was most of my time in Glasgow, not so much like exploring the features of the city so much as having like a bit of a walking tour with an old friend and catching up with that friend. That said, something that Dan and I found out later, and that my friend also confirmed, is that Glasgow has a bit of a race issue apparently, which is a little sad, and also which goes against a lot of the idea that Scotland is a much more welcoming place to outsiders than England, or it is more, I don't know, left-leaning and all of this stuff. And I have a lot of thoughts about the relationship between all of the countries that make up the United Kingdom. But what I will say is, after this trip, where I went in feeling pretty neutral, like I didn't have many preconceived ideas about what Scotland was going to be like or anything like that. I just knew a lot of what people said about it, and it felt like people were putting it on a certain pedestal. But what I saw when I was there was a place that is ravaged by the same sorts of inequality that England is, where the capital cities are getting everything and everywhere around is not invested in enough. And that's not a problem that I see being solved by Scottish independence personally. And it does feel to me, as an outsider, I guess, like the nationalist movements are preying on a lot of emotional things, and it seems like a very similar situation to me as Brexit was. So I have so many thoughts around all of that, and I could go into that more in depth at some point later in future. Maybe I'll read some books that are specifically around that topic that can tie it in a little better and be a little bit more robust in terms of a useful discussion to you, rather than just vibes of an experience that I had. But again, I just want to say, like, having all of these complex thoughts and feelings about a place tend to be part of an interesting and enriching and rewarding experience for me. So even though I'm aware that some of my thoughts might seem negative perhaps, it's for me it was a really interesting experience, and I'm glad that I had it, and I will definitely be visiting Scotland again probably in future. But yeah, there were a lot of socio-political thoughts being there. Now for the fun part. So I have been doing a lot of knitting recently, and my desire to sew has been rekindled, and I have a lot of ideas. First things first, I knitted myself a second jumper, which I am over the moon thrilled about. It has two obvious mistakes and one that probably only I would ever notice. But of the two obvious mistakes, one of them could look like a design decision, and the other one, I think, you wouldn't maybe notice unless you were looking for mistakes. So I'm really pleased with it. I wore that jumper loads throughout our Scotland trip, and I've been wearing it a whole lot. I've been wearing it more than my first jumper, even though it's a lot warmer than the first one. But it's just so soft, so I love it so much. Following making my second jumper, I realized that I was resisting my inclination towards making more goals for myself within my hobbies. That's something that I struggle with because I want my hobbies to be fun and I want them to feel like I can still be spontaneous and stuff, but at the same time I want there to be enough structure that I'm not making stuff just for the sake of making things, because that feels wasteful to me, and I need there to be a good balance between creativity and utility in the things that I do, even in my hobbies. But I was also realizing that every time I find a new hobby, I can't just keep adding tasks for myself to do in that hobby without overloading myself. So I came up with the idea of a hobby bingo card, and I made myself a bingo card that has different like goals that I'd like to achieve within my hobby, and the idea is for it to be, you know, for the year or whatever, and you know, I'll see at the end of the year, did I make a bingo? And I don't know, nothing happens after that. It's not like I get a prize or anything like that, but still I like that idea, and I think it makes it such that my hobbies aren't necessarily going to take over my life, but they're still present. And if I feel like, oh, I really want to knit something, I can look at my hobby card and be like, oh, what did I want to, oh, I wanted to do some color work. Yeah, maybe I'll take off that bingo square, you know? It made sense to me at the time, and it still makes sense to me, so I'm gonna roll with that. And probably every year I'll reassess my bingo card and see if there's things that were like one-time things. So for example, trying ceramics is on my bingo card. That's something that you do once. Like, even if I continue doing ceramics, it won't be like trying it for the first time, if you know what I mean. So I could potentially replace try ceramics once I've done it with trying a specific technique within ceramics, you know? So I do have like a lineup of other things to like scooch in after I've done these things. So one of my bingo squares is to try color work in knitting. I've done that now. I made the Halibut Cowl by Caitlin Hunter, and I really enjoyed that process. I realized that I was reading the entire chart the wrong way around. I was reading it from top to bottom, and I should have been reading it from bottom to top. Whatever, it still worked out. But next year I might swap that out for something like try mosaic knitting or something like that. Anyway, that has really reinvigorated my desire to do a lot of different crafty things, and that includes sewing. And I have a lot of projects that I'd like to get around to with sewing. I would like to sew a knitting notions like case of some kind. I'd like to sew a new water resistant canvas sort of bag thing. At the moment the council gives us a thick plastic sort of bag thing for some of our recycling, and it isn't big enough and it tears easily. It's torn now, and I think it would be nicer and better fit for purpose if I just made one that was a little bit more robust and a better size and could be put away in a better kind of way. I also would like to make a hood. So I recently-ish, I think last year, got a coat that it's a nice smart looking black coat. I really like it, but if it rains I don't have a hood, and I like having some sort of hood for when it rains. However, I've seen a lot of people like to make those like knitted hoods or balaclavas or whatever, I guess, and to me that's just not good enough, because that's just like it's not weather resistant. Like, I don't need something warm on my head. I like, have you seen my hair? I need something that would be water resistant in case it rains. That's the only reason that I'm going to be wearing a hood. So I've put together a pattern for myself of different types of hood that I can make out of a water resistant cotton canvas or oilcloth or something, and it will be like a removable hood that I can take with me instead of, say, an umbrella or, you know, wearing a hoodie or something like that, which would like dress down my nice coat. I'm probably not explaining that well, but in my head it's very clear. So I have a lot of projects like that that I like to get around to. Anyway, I have rambled a good long time, but this is me just jumping back into making videos and getting back into the swing of that. I'm gonna leave this there because this is already feeling like it's gonna be a very long video, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye.